Hey, welcome back to the Marriott Marquis. I'm here doing another live stream with a really great partner of ours, SimSpace. I do want to bring up Mr. Lee Rossi. He's a co-founder and CTO. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And very excited to be here and very excited to kind of go through and explain a little bit of what we've gone through as a company and then how we work with Mandiant over the last couple of years for that. So the talk here, beyond simulation, how do we actually go through these? And let's get into it. So what's the challenge? The challenge that we are facing over here is effectively is organization lacks the experience to like a severe cyber attack that until it happens in production. And what does that actually mean? So at some point, we're all going to get attacked. We're all going to get hit. And when it does happen, how do we make sure that the team, the tech, the people are all really ready to be able to actually, I'd say, defend against it. And you don't want to be learning the playbooks and learning the things in the middle of the event itself. So this is where we get into, well, what does that actually translate to? And there's really three components of this one. It's the people side, the process, and the technology. So on the people, how do you make sure that all these operators that you hired between the SOC, the investigation, the other ones, know their roles, know how to do it? You're in the middle of the battle going through. There's the coordination aspect of it. You have challenges in actually going through and getting the people skilled up and working through that. So that's part of it. We've all written up our playbooks. We've all written up all the various things that we're supposed to do. But it's one thing to kind of go through as a little bit of a writing it up. It's another when you're getting punched in the face and trying to figure out, how do I really go through this quickly? And how do I get that muscle memory to go through? And same thing with tech. We're out here at RSA, lots and lots of vendors. You bought a lot of them. And now the question is, how well is it going to work when you're in the middle of all these things? And how do you get comfortable with not just looking at it, but responding and coordinating and walking through and really kind of tightening it up? So how do we make an attack that could be in your network for perhaps months, get it really down tight to the smallest amount of time? The smallest amount of time that they're in there, the least amount of damage that can kind of go through. So SimSpace, who are we? We're a company now that spun out of, I'd say, the military, national labs and others. We're taking a lot of the experience out of the labs and others to work through with the U.S. military. U.S. Cyber Command is one of the users that leverages the platform to train up all the defensive, offensive operators at individual team training. So very large events with partners and coalition and others. We work with a lot of our allied governments that are coming through, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, of how the U.S. works with allies and Mandiant to be able to actually work on these. Part of that creates very high demands for the fidelity, the scale, the ability to operate on those. And that's what we really distinguish ourselves on is those aspects of it. Of course, this is not just for military, it's for commercial. Every large enterprise, Fortune 2000, has the same challenge as a government. How do I make sure that my SOCs, my teams, my technology is really ready when an attack is going to happen for them? So the customers that we work with are the same as Mandiant, and that's why we're actually a great fit together as we go through. So let's talk about the platform and what we actually do over here. Foundational to a lot of what we have is what we call a cyber range, the ability to create very high fidelity environments of a network, your network, and customize it. So now you have the applications, the software, the security tools, the emulation of the user. And we're going to immerse people into that to be able to go through this experiential side of it. There are a number of capabilities that come into it. How do you actually identify new candidates? So it's a hiring aspect. How do I train up the individuals for each one of their positions? SOC analysts, forensics, red teamers, others. How do I test through my playbooks? And those are more at the individual aspect. But now we want to get into the teams. How do we actually work as a team coordinating through a SOC against live red teams and seeing how well we can do? That's on the training side. But the other one is, how do we actually test the stack? How do we measure how good the technology is for that? So with those, we capture the analytics, and then we actually run through. We do, like Mandiant, professional services, experienced instructors to be able to actually train and provide the threat to go through. And I'll give some examples of these as we go into it. All right. You hear the word ranges. Many times it's going to be individual training, generic network. What we specialize is modeling your production network. How do we actually make a great high-fidelity version that actually matches your architecture, your operating systems, your security tools, your policies, and get all that in there. So modeling the real environment as much as possible. Again, using this notion of train like you fight. In that environment, we want to have real emulation of the APTs, the threat actors that are coming through. So network representation, real sophisticated APT threats, and Mandiant does a wonderful job with all the int and all that of understanding what the adversaries are doing to be able to actually run it. And how do we keep those threats up to date? What's happening in China and North Korea and Iran? How do we model that for the threats that are coming through? And this really leads to the optimization. No matter where you're on the path, let's get better individually, team, and continuously measure and improve with insights that can come through on them. All right, so what does a network look like as an example over here? So this is a generic financial network that we can use for some of the initial setups. It's going to have some enclaves over here for model of the internet. It's going to have a series of internal networks. There's going to be some firewalls that are going to be separating the traffic away. We're going to have some business systems in this network for financial, so automatic teller machines or payment systems that are going through. And then there's going to be a series of lines of business. These lines of businesses are going to be modeling the HR teams, ops, accounting, and others. We're going to want to add the security tools that your organization has in there. So whether it's Palo Alto or FireEye or Tanium. And then there's going to be a series of APT attacks, 2 that are so stealthy that are not showing up over here on it. But what are the latest attacks that come through? So network environment with your tools, with the models of users generating that background traffic, and then the attacks. And now we want to see how well your tech stack and your teams perform in these environments. So when we talked about optimizing, it's about measuring. How do we collect the data? It's highly instrumented. Collect the data from the network, collect the data from the tools, and start measuring what we call your defensive success rate. And wherever you are, how do we progressively improve in terms of getting better on there? How do we show that we're getting better at our best practices and reducing the dwell time? The less time an adversary is in that network, the better off you are in terms of the potential damage to do that. So how are you improving over time, and how do you compare with your peers and others is a way to start measuring these aspects for them. Okay, I like this slide from Sunil Yu, the Cyber Defense Matrix, because I think it does a wonderful job of kind of capturing across the various areas, identifying, protecting, detecting threats, and responding to what is it that you want to actually defend against. The devices, the applications, secure against devices. And the point over here is there's a lot of different vendors in each one of the categories. Every one of the organizations probably has something in the order of 40, 50. The largest have 100 different tools. And for those 100 tools, how do you keep up with the, whatever the latest one is that is supposed to be good? How do I make sure that I'm actually buying the right one? How do I, modernize, if you will, some of these, for example, do it. So whatever the tools are, how do I measure the effectiveness of what I have? How do I potentially consider new alternates that are out there? So we think of the left side as a lot of technology controls. How well are these tools able to identify, protect, as in like stop the attacks? But at some point, an adversary is going to get in. And on the right side, it's all about the human aspect of it. And that's why putting this as an overlay. On the left, how do we measure your technology stack? How do we actually make sure that your network defenses, your firewalls, your SIEMs, your EDRs are effective? And then in some areas, all right, I may need to have a new network defense, network detection and response. So how do I go through and purchase potentially a new tool as a POV go through? The right side is what we're going to talk about today, is how do we make sure that your teams are ready, that your teams are actually prepared, that they've seen some of these attacks, that you're actually building up that experience in there. And that's what we've been working with Mandiant on some of the events. Okay, one thing to consider is no matter who the organization is, there's a certain level of maturity that they're going to have. Some organizations are very early on in the process. They're trying to just go through and kind of build up the skills at the individual, select the tools, and go through. Whereas others are very well they're very mature. So now we get into an optimization. How do we make sure that these teams are seeing the threats, that they're actually exercising, that they're playing through? So when we think about a training event, the first thing is how far along are they? Are they at the intermediate skill level? Are they advanced? And that's where we can start figuring out what is the, what level of training and support and testing do we need to be able to do? So let's talk a little bit about Mandiant and ThreatSpace and what we're doing. And something that started happening about 3-4 years ago is Mandiant has always had a really great set of instructors. And those instructors on incident response and others have this experience from running it in the real world. So how do we take that experience and now apply it to the customers? So In the words over here, it's an intelligence-led, proactive technology-enabled engagement that really allows the experience from the Mandiant operators to be brought into the customers, Fortune 2000, to really go through and say, all right, what happens if there's some new APT 29 or 41 or some threat? How would your team react? How would your team do? And really bring that experience over to them. So there's a number of different options that Mandiant has come up with over the years, and Nadine Tanner, the lead over there, is doing a wonderful job of setting up, for example, you can see options over here. Let's do a 2-day event. Let's do a 4-day event, or others. And it's in a bunch of different areas. These areas could be, for example, how do you deal with insider threats, or supply chains, or the latest beacons and others, and start getting into the area. So back to that organization, where do they want to be able to actually experience some of the threats? Where do they want to train? Where do they want to go up? And really start going through these for that. So the relationship with Mandiant in this case, they bring our experience, they leverage the SimSpace Cyber Range to be able to actually go through, customize it for the customers, and bring that professional services-led live instructors that are great at doing their thing for these. What does the network look like? So in this case, again, it's a 1-2-day event, relatively simple network, but here's where you can start saying, all right, what are the security tools? And you can run down the list on the right to be able to figure out the technologies that are appropriate for that organization. And then you start looking at the segments where, of course, you're going to have some amount of, some DMZs, some business networks, some security tools. In this case here, it's going to have a lot of the, I'll say, the Google and the Mandiant tool suite to be able to operate. But it's really kind of giving that experience of an attack coming in. How do you investigate? How do you analyze? How do you respond? And then after the event, kind of go through those coaching moments and those learning moments to be able to actually run through. All right. I want to pivot now to talk about some specific examples of how SimSpace and Mandiant work together. And I'm going to talk about some of the work that we started just before COVID, February, March in 2020, where we together started going around a lot of the Eastern European countries. And the challenge here, there's a lot of governments out there, allied governments, that are getting attacked, they're going through, and how do we help elevate their cybersecurity posture? How do we help improve their readiness to defend against the near threats that are right around there? And we all know who they are. So given the challenge of building up the militaries, building up the organization, we've combined and worked together to deliver what we call the virtual training environment, or the cyber range that allows them to be able to actually build up their workforce, their tools, and others. And I'll show an example now where we've actually had several deployments that you can measurably see these countries getting a lot better as how they're operating. So, there we go. So just as an example of some of the countries, again, I'm talking about allied governments that we're working with. The ones in green are the ones that together we've deployed into, if you will. So helping out a lot of countries, I'll say bordering Russia, and a lot of countries that are bordering China. How well can we actually help together build up their capabilities? So provide, in this case, an appliance, a ready-to-go setup in their militaries to be able to actually start going through this 1, 2, 3 year journey as they build up their capabilities. And many times they are not quite as advanced as some of the other ones. So as they're in there, we kind of set, what are the goals for Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4? Q1, initial setup, initial familiarization. Let's get you on there. Let's get some individual training. Let's go through there. But when we start getting into the second quarter, all right, great. Now that we start progressing, now that we're doing some SimSpace-led training on some generic things, Mandiant comes in and runs a ThreatSpace event. So let's bring these experts into that. Let's give them some experience and go through. As we kind of iterate every quarter, the teams and everybody gets better. Better networks, better fidelity, better engagements. How do we start testing the stack? How do we go through? And eventually building up to some of these exercises. Let's not just do the individual. Let's not just the team. Let's do some national level exercises for the militaries and as we go through. Another capability that Mandiant has had that we've worked together is something called MCOP. It's the malware repurposing of some of the attacks they see out there. How do you provide those to be able to see the real threats in their environments to be able to operate? So I want to close to some degree with an example of the countries that we deployed into. There's an exercise at the end of June where each one of the countries listed over there, in this case the Balkans, so Slovenia, Croatia, Kosovo, and others, aligned with their U.S. Guard unit, are actually going to be sitting in the environment, working through, defending against the threats. So now we have countries working side by side with their U.S. partners, states, and going through this exercise, all operating on a SimSpace platform, trained up by SimSpace and Mandiant as we enable and build up their capability so they can start defending themselves and improving it. And again, it's exciting to be able to help them out together on it. So with that, I will thank you and appreciate the time and everything for it.